You may not know the name Cyrille Humen, but I can guarantee you, if you've seen more than one Poi video online, you've definitely seen someone who spins like him. Cyrille has arguably had the biggest stylistic impact on the Poi world since Nick Woolsey. He remade Poi in his own radically different image. So how did he do it, and what parts of the Poi world do we have to thank him for? In this video, I'm going to tell you why I think Cyrille is the father of modern Poi. Drex here from Drex Factor Poi, sharing with you the love of Poi spinning and flow arts to benefit your body and brain. And in this video, I'm going to share with you the many contributions of Cyrille Humen to modern Poi and why he's one of the few Poi spinners I'd argue can be said to have started an entire stylistic genre. But before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to the friends of the channel. Big thanks to Dark Monk, Fire Mecha, Flowfests, Flow Toys, Pyroterra Light Toys, and Ultra Poi for helping to make the videos on this channel possible. You can learn more about all these awesome companies and the work they're doing to support flow artists like yourself by checking out the links down in the description of this video. And special thanks to the non-business friend of the channel, Pekka Bektonen. Thank you so much for supporting my channel, my work, and my mission. Alright, so first up, who exactly is Cyrille Humen? Cyrille Humen is a French Poi spinner who has made quite a splash over the course of the past 15 years with a style that has integrated a lot of dance, circus, contact juggling, and more. And to understand why Cyrille was so influential, it's helpful to get an idea of what the Poi scene was actually like when he entered into it. For most of the early 2000s, Poi had a pretty limited vocabulary. You had your weaves, butterflies, and windmills, but except for a few outliers, Poi didn't get much more complicated than that. That is, until Nick Woolsey hit the scene. Nick's video, Dervishly Yours, transformed the Poi scene and created many of the conventions that we still use today. It oriented Poi tricks on flat planes relative to the audience and opened up the world of Poi flowers. Because of it, we started thinking of Poi tricks in terms of the shapes that they could create as they spun a path through the air. And if you'd like to learn more about Nick and the impact he had on the Poi scene, I did a video on him that I'll link to down in the description as well as up in the cards. Into this environment came the first generation of Tech Poi spinners. People who took the idea of pattern spinning and combining shapes and ran with it. Frameworks for understanding how different Poi tricks are related sprung up practically overnight, with the emphasis always being, how do we find the next cool trick that nobody's performed yet? And it was in this environment that Cyrille made his first major contribution to the Poi world. Part 1. Reflecting on the past. I first became aware of Cyrille when I came across a Microsoft Word document floating around on Poi forums that was called Spinning and Geometry. And it was a doozy. Cyrille introduced a new theory and explanation for how he viewed timing and direction from the standpoint of symmetry, as well as a lengthy treatise on how to explore a variety of different simple geometric shapes with Poi. This spectacularly detailed paper includes not just pages and pages of different patterns that Cyrille had either already performed or believed he could, but also included is what I think is the earliest diagram I've found published of the shape that we would come to call Zan's diamond. And as a reminder, there is no one in the world more baffled that this trick came to be named after Zan than Zan Moore himself. Lots of people got there before him. But what this paper showed was that Cyrille was already way ahead of the curve in imagining the possibilities of Poi and the shapes and patterns that they could produce. He saw not just the potential for generating complex patterns, but also was openly beginning to wonder what would happen if we started to deconstruct our thinking of how Poi could move and be spun. What if we didn't think of the shapes we create as being continuous? What if we paused and explored certain segments of them with different driving styles? What happens when you deliberately create segments that overlap and interfere with each other? And what if you focused on moving the handle instead of the head? Cyrille actually created a video to explore these concepts visually that he called Geometric Fire Poi. It used what was then kind of a difficult technique to show off the trails of the Poi and give the viewer an idea of his theories in action. And unfortunately, in what will prove to be an ongoing theme, it is also sadly no longer accessible online. But trust me, it was really cool looking. So did Cyrille's treatise become a foundational work of the Tech Poi world? Well, it certainly had its admirers, myself included, but by and large it didn't quite make the same impact that the work of people like Alien John and the aforementioned Zan Moore did. And that wasn't for lack of good ideas, believe me, but it did make it far more shocking when Cyrille resurfaced with what I'd argue was his most influential project still to this date. Part 2. 3 videos that changed Poi. 2010 was the year that Cyrille changed the Poi world forever. He did this by dropping a video called Manipoi that, like Dervishly Yours, is one of those moments when you can see the entire Poi world hinge on a single video. Contact Poi had existed for years prior to that. Ronan had invented them some time before and even carved out some basic Contact Poi vocabulary with them, but rare was the person who actually learned these tricks or even picked up a set of these Poi. In the somewhat unusual circumstances that somebody would actually pick up Contact Poi, it was almost never to learn how to do contact rolls with them. Overwhelmingly, it was because they made stalls and pendulums look awesome. In fact, they were originally marketed not as Contact Poi, but as Pendulum Poi, when Home of Poi sold the first commercial sets. So it's not an understatement to say that going from working on intricate Poi patterns like what would become known as Zan's Diamond to working on Contact Poi was, shall we say, unconventional. But my goodness, did it have an impact. Unfortunately, like Geometric Fire Poi, Manipoi has been unavailable to view now for several years, leaving this a very crucial piece of Poi history lost to the ravages of time. But I can tell you several things that did appear in it. Cyrille had been deeply studying the art of contact juggling and was able to truly fuse together many of its most popular tricks into things that he could perform with Poi. Among the highlights were folding lines, transfers, isolations, and stalls, all performed with Poi for the first time on video. And almost overnight, everyone had to learn how to do Contact Poi. Ronan may have invented Contact Poi, but for the generation that transitioned from Tech Poi to manipulation between 2010 and 2013, it was Cyrille's heels that they were biting at. His vocabulary they sought to duplicate. His innovations they wanted to measure up to. I actually think it's fair to say that without Cyrille, Contact Poi would not have become fashionable, let alone the default form factor and style of the Poi world today. Now, this is not to say that there haven't been other innovators working in the same style who also advanced the art forward. Keith Marshall's work was also incredibly important, not just for innovating further upon the style, but also for physically touring the United States in the early 2010s and teaching people the concepts face to face. Tim Goddard also worked to popularize the style, not just by creating his own tricks, but also by creating tutorials that explained how to do many of the wild explorations that Cyrille was showing off. And there are countless others too. But is there a timeline in which Contact Poi takes over the Poi world as it did without Manipoi coming out? I honestly don't think so. Few people cared much about Contact Poi before it was released, and everybody cared about it after. And as it turned out, Cyrille was just getting warmed up. His next major work, Melting Poi, was released the following year, and while it also included many elements of Contact Poi to it, he expanded greatly on his experimentation to include a dizzying array of body tracers, throws, and even a shocking amount of dance elements thrown in as well. But more than that, it was clear that Cyrille had radically reimagined the Poi as an object. It wasn't just purely a prop used to draw out patterns anymore. It was a thing to be balanced, a thing to get tangled in, and perhaps most importantly, it was a thing to be thrown. This video includes a dizzying array of what would eventually come to be known as no-beat throws, wherein Poi are thrown with the characteristics of a flat or penguin throw in juggling. The idea being that rather than spinning the Poi as it tumbles overhead, that one should control the momentum of it to create throws in which the performer's mastery of the Poi's momentum is as clear in the air as it is when they're holding it. And it also includes an enormous amount of throws performed across the body in various permutations, from side to side or front to back, all the above, and everything in between. There are additional sections on tangles, isolations, and negative space. This video covers an absurd amount of ground, and it remains the most viewed video on Cyrille's YouTube channel. And yes, it was indeed followed up another year later with another groundbreaking video. This one called Brainstorming. And dude, this one goes hard on the throws, and I do mean hard. Unlike the leisurely editing of melting poi, Brainstorming seemed edited for the TikTok generation. At all times, there is something new being shown. It is a non-stop barrage of intense and virtuosic throws, contact, and negative space work. It also features some of Cyrille's most physically demanding work: leaps, leg traps, pirouettes aplenty, and much more. Where before Cyrille seemed content to throw out an idea or two and let them stand on their own, he's now exploring momentum, seeing how far he can continue the poise movement to create phrases that have a distinct beginning, middle, and end. Now, you may have noticed that we are now quite far off the roadmap we originally started on. We're no longer spinning flowers like Nick Woolsey or even performing Zan's Diamond. And yes, I would argue that Cyrille's work represents the critical transition point from the older Tech Poi movement to a newer one that I like to call Part 3, The Road to Manipulation. This is a somewhat controversial position, but as I've outlined in other video essays, I believe that there was a clear stylistic break from the Tech Poi movement of the late 2000s to the current dominant style, which I refer to as manipulation in the early 2010s. Where Tech Poi centers around performing patterns while the poi is kept spinning and creating frameworks of thought to understand how many of these patterns interrelate, manipulation sees the poi more as a found object and integrates techniques such as contact juggling, toss juggling, and negative space into its use of the prop. And those three pillars, contact juggling, toss juggling, and negative space, are all aspects of poi that Cyrille not only explored, but popularized. And again, there's no shortage of other poi spinners to point to who've done influential work in this realm as well. But I believe it's Cyrille that is the true linchpin here, the maestro from whose symphony all the other artists were playing. Nowadays, if you watch more than a couple poi videos on any given platform, you will find someone making extensive use of one or more of these techniques. Contact poi and tosses had become as much a part of the vocabulary of poi as weaves and flowers before them. Cyrille was one of the many influences working to bridge the gaps between the poi and circus or juggling world, and I would argue he's been one of the most successful to do it as well, finding a role in the Visual Juggling Project and on stages at juggling conventions. I don't think that it's a stretch to say that few people in the poi world even knew what contact poi was before Manipoi was released. And afterwards, few people wanted to be left behind as it became clear that it was the wave of the future. The modern emphasis on virtuosic throws is due in huge part to his influence. The ever-broadening array of contact poi tricks out there are expansions of the vocabulary he defined. I don't think that it's any coincidence that in 2012, the first year that I hosted the top 10 favorite poi spinners list here on my channel, Cyrille was the guy who topped the list. It was one of those rare moments where, even at the time, the long-term influence of a person's work is immediately obvious. We have been living in the era of manipulation now for more than 10 years in the poi world. And I honestly think the catalyst for creating that world was the work of Cyrille Humen. If you're rolling a poi head across your body or tossing it in creative ways, you're either working directly in his mold or in the mold of somebody who was cribbing notes from him. And that's pretty impressive if you ask me. Thanks for the groundbreaking world, Cyrille. We are living in a world that you helped bring into being. So, you may have noticed that this video focused heavily on Cyrille's place in the history of poi and his impact on the poi community, while saying comparatively little about what defines his style or why it shifted so radically between his geometry paper and Manipoi. And that's because I've put together a video essay on those topics over on my second channel. This is a channel I've created to explore poi work from a more artistic perspective, and that seemed like a great place to put those thoughts. You can go check it out to get my thoughts on what I believe Cyrille has been trying to achieve in his work, what most of his followers either miss or disregard when they copy from him, and why I think his and my work actually have some surprisingly similar intentions behind them, but for one key difference. That video is live now over on my other channel at Poi Dancer Drex, link in the description. Has Cyrille had a major influence on your spinning? What tricks have you picked up from him? Leave me a comment and let me know. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to keep the conversation going and to help my channel grow. This video would not be possible without my amazing supporters on Patreon. In particular, I'd love to give a shout out to my Flow patrons who are listed on screen right now. Thank you so much for making this channel and the videos on it possible. And if you enjoyed this or any other video on my channel and you would like to support my work, please check out my Patreon over at patreon.com/DrexFactorPoi and sign up. You can get access to a whole host of amazing rewards, but even better than that, you'll be supporting me in my mission to bring poi spinning and flow arts to the whole wide world. Go check that out, please and thank you. And if you'd like to learn more about a person that I think is one of the great unsung innovators of the Tech Poi generation, I did a whole video essay on why we do not give Leo Akaza nearly enough credit for his contributions to the poi world and why that needs to change. You can find the link to it up on screen here. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to get out and flow today, and I'll see you with a new video real soon. Take care now. Peace.